on this cloud. Oh, yay! And we've got lots of mentors here from Club Thrive. Welcome back. I guess because it's Monday, you guys are joining me. Monday's your day. Welcome. Welcome, rhythm. I feel like we have the rhythm section. That's great. So I wanted to give a bit of an update in terms of what we worked on at the Alta event. So this will be review for Nicole, and any insights on how it's been practical will be helpful. So what I'll start with is just kind of orienting us to where we are in the cores for this conversation today. So when we're in Club Thrive, we've got future you, and then we've got strategy. And so I'm guessing that I'll be adding this part either to core 2 or I'll probably be adding it to identity evolution, the part that we're going to go over today. So as a community that's evolving, we're always learning and growing. And so the point is that we need to update things as we're learning and growing so that our language stays current, which, is kind of messy when you're building a system, because then you got to, keep going back and think big, test small, fail fast, learn always. You have to do this like iterative updates, just like your iPhone, just like your computer operating system. So in a bit, that's what I want to cover today, is like some of the things that we were working with that might be new language. We've been working with it in Club Hero for quite a while. And then in this last event with at Alta, we kind of went through another update in terms of understanding future youth. So I think the fastest way for me to explain things, and then we'll workshop them, is both through slides and also through drawing on my iPad. I'll start with the iPad, and I know for many of you, or for a few of you, this will be like a lot of review, but what I find with review is that it helps the iteration helps until it's part of your natural thinking. So when we have automated thinking processes, then we know something is just really part of how we think about things and who we are. So if you're listening again, you can also find like where in your life is this already true for you? Like that's how you think about things, and then where is it newer? Okay, my iPad wants to reject. Oh, seriously. Oh, yes. User error. There we go. Okay. So when I was writing Master of You and talking about identity evolution and future you, we have the evolutionary spiral, which each level of development you transcend and include the one above. So like if you're linear, right, you just stay the same, so you don't actually ascend. So with the developmental spiral, it's measuring human development, you transcend and include as you grow. And if we tip this on its side, right, this is now the evolutionary spiral with a view of growth path and depth path. And if we look at this growth path, what we see, if we're in a true growth path, is it's actually like more, it's a little bit more aggressive like that. And one of the ways that I see it is that it's basically like there's a ladder, there's a new floor, there's a ladder, there's a new floor, there's a ladder, and there's a new floor. So each of these is like, this is a new floor, and where there's a new floor, there's a new filter. And the new filter means that a lot of what got you there won't help you now. So there's usually new skills, there's new tools, there's ways that you need to continue to evolve and develop to be in growth. Like, does that get harder or easier with age? Because of the law of accumulation, there's a lot that actually gets easier, right? Where you have an accumulation of skills that you continue to refine and have more amplitude with those skills. Okay, so then one of the new core pieces that I wanted to talk about today, and this is what we worked on in Alta, is the growth on a growth path is fractal. So like who you are, like who are you? Oops, who are you? This is a popular question. Who am I? It's a popular question in spirituality groups. Ramana Maharshi, he really popularized this inquiry practice sometime in the last 100 years before he died. This whole inquiry that you go into, like, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And at the essence, like, you're the ground of being and you're the evolutionary impulse. Like, you're both of those, but you're also unique you, right? You're also who you are. That's different than everyone else. And so when we look at this evolutionary spiral and growth path and depth path, we find that it follows a fractal. So what is the fractal nature of you? And a fractal is where, well, I think I'm just going to play this little quick YouTube video of understanding that, like, not everything in nature follows a fractal, but nature follows a fractal. So I just want to I'm going to go to that next. And as you're watching this little 3-minute video, I'm going to play it at 1.5 speed. You can kind of keep that in mind of, like, who are you as a fractal? So let me share. So again, like, who are you as a fractal?
What do galaxies, cloud formations, your nervous system, mountain ranges, and coastlines all have in common? They all contain never-ending patterns known as fractals. A classic example of a fractal in nature is broccoli, in that the whole stalk is a similar version of one of its branches. So cut off one piece, and you're left with a smaller version of the entire broccoli. Snowflakes are another example. It's often said that no two snowflakes are ever the same, and fractals offer a fascinating explanation as to why nature works in this way, why nature continuously creates new, self-replicating, yet unique structures, and how the smallest things in existence are necessary components of the greater whole. The term fractal was coined by Benoit Mandelbrot, who was working at computer giant IBM in 1980. Mandelbrot had been fascinated by discoveries of mathematicians from the early 19th century who were attempting to define their understanding of what a curve is. Experiments such as George Cantor's discovery that a single line could be divided forever, and Helga von Koch's triangle, a shape that has an infinite perimeter of finite area, resulted in the term monsters. Mandelbrot used the modern computing powers developed by IBM to run these monster equations millions of times over. This process led him to a breakthrough equation combining the patterns found in previous monsters, resulting in his own set of numbers. This would become known as the Mandelbrot set, an infinite geometrical visualization of a fractal. One of the most amazing things about the Mandelbrot set is that theoretically, if left by itself, would continue to create infinitely new patterns from the original structure, proving that something could be magnified forever. Fractal geometry is currently applied in many fields. For example, research into climate change and the trajectory of dangerous meteorites, helping with cancer.
Okay, I'm going to go to another video now, and just to see, this is what again, like, the fractal looks like as you go into it. So we're zooming in. You can also zoom out with fractals. So in Sanskrit, that's unmesha, imesha. So right now we're zooming in. And again, with understanding future you and fractals and figuring out, like, what is your fractal, what is your dharma in this lifetime, you can see that it goes deeper and it goes more creative, but it's still it's in the same pattern of itself. And this is what they're saying with Mandelbrot's set. IBM needed a certain amount of computing power in order to figure out what is the actual equation behind fractals that occur everywhere in nature, including in us, is that it goes infinitely, right? Like, it's an infinite amount of unwinding or winding. So some people find that looking, actually, Joe Dispenza uses fractals a lot at his live sessions in this sort of kaleidoscope experience where you're going into patterns in nature. Okay, so that's a little bit on fractals.
Chaos present in everything from a drop of water to...
even in those of you who have your own businesses, like the 80-12, there's this really good book, 80-20 of Sales and Marketing, which describes the Pareto's principle and fractals and how that goes into sales and marketing. It can really go into any aspect of business, and you can 80-20 something, which is like what are the 20% of effort that drives 80% of the results? What are the 20% of clients that get 80% of the results? And then you can do that again within that 20%. There's still an 80-20 within the 80-20s. And that's the idea of when something is in a fractal pattern. So it's useful in a lot of different ways. I want to share it's my screen again to I didn't want to share that. Let me try again. Okay, so one of the way of understanding your growth is that you maintain 20% of your last floor. So of what got you to your next floor, you maintain 20%, and then you lose 80%. So this is a refinement. To me, I think of it often, it's kind of like in compost. Like my compost heap right now, being the end of summer, is huge, right? There's just like a lot of stuff in there, and then it'll literally decrease by 80% in terms of volume, and I'll probably have, about 2,000% more microbes in it as it refines itself and grows. So this 80-20, that this is happening in our various stages of development, can be really helpful. And then in Master View, a lot of what we do is say, like, well, there's a way up the ladder, that there's like an action plan, and this shows up in our clubthrive tracker as far as like, how do we know the goal, right? And then how do we strategize towards that goal? And those of you who are here last Thursday and Friday, we spent a couple days doing that. And hopefully what happens is in that process, there's an integration that happens between a discovery of parts of yourself that you may have left behind that are necessary to the fractal. Right? Often people have this with like a health crisis, or we could say an intuition crisis or a depth crisis, that often there's something was out of integrity that's actually necessary for the fractal. I left some part of myself behind. That becomes integrated, and that is actually like the rooting that gives the rise to the next growth phase. And in that process, we know more of what's actually essential, the essential parts of that next 20%. Actually, this card is funny. This was the Mushroom Spirit Oracle card I picked for the Alta event, which was funny because it was all about growth and destruction cycle. Oh, the irony. So what is in destruction? That's the feminine principle. This is the depth path. So depth leads to destruction. It's often ugly, it's often painful, it's often messy, it's often the stuff you don't want to show anyone else. It's often quite vulnerable if it's in the depth part of the equation. So if it's in this depth phase part, if it's in an integrity part, that's often how that shows up. And there's an evolution then that happens in that. There's a real evolution of the identity that happens as we then move that part into a growth path. So some part that was not integrated gets integrated, and the fractal gets refined and more self-knowing and self-perpetuating, self-replicating according to the pattern. So when a cell is replicating not according to the DNA structure, it's called it's either has mutated, right? And sometimes it mutates to the point of being a pathological cell, like a cancer cell. So self-replicating according to the design, according to the fractal, is what we're looking at in there. Okay, back to my shaggy ink cap. Where did that go? What is in growth? This is the masculine principle. This is like Brahman. This is also like, I would say like Lakshmi, Saraswati would also be in these very like growth path type goddesses, much more external, abundance, radiant, all that. Whereas like Kali is like bloody and dark. Do you guys get that? Like they're both part of what becomes the 20%. It's not like the 80% is the ugly, bloody death part. No. It's easy to think that in a culture that's oriented towards more of a, I would say, I wouldn't even say Judeo-Christian. I'd really say more of like a Christian virgin saint aspect where we look at more purity and cleanliness as being divine. But if in the archetypes that precede that, you see an integrated virgin and witch. So the witch is part of the dark phase of the virgin. The virgin's the light phase. The witch is the dark phase. Integrated, they're the whole. When only you have half of it, it's not integrated. And that's where you get a ton of plastic surgery. No, that's where you get, right? Like that's where you get a lot of confusion in the fractal, and you get disconnect from root power or sushumna power, right? And that's, that's kind of everywhere in culture. I just want to be crystal clear here that it's the destruction, right? It's the hard things. It's these buried dreams. It's the stuff that's beneath the surface that refines our vision to what is the goal. And it's in that process of integrating the darkness and the light, of integrating water and earth with air and fire, that can really help us point the way forward into, again, if we just kind of come back to strategy, it's like the strategy is always in light of the goal. What the goal actually is, right, it's often buried. The reason it's often buried is because there's stuff that we don't want to look at. There's parts of the selves that are less integrated, or stuff we don't want to look at, or that are hidden beneath the surface. So we might be setting goals that are goals really that whatever, it was your father's goal for you, or your mother's goal for you, or it's a long ancestral held pattern, etc. Okay, any questions, insights so far?
Yeah, Kate, it's Carolyn. Just, it may just be because I'm on a tired Monday morning, but that went by so fast. That was so much going by so fast that I feel like I'm scrambling to catch up. So
yeah, who else feels that way? That was a lot, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful, and I've heard pieces of it before, but this core thing about the fractal, especially, I mean, I sort of intuit around the 80-20 being a fractal thing, but we were saying about the retrieving of the missing piece of the fractal that somehow got lost.
Yeah.
That's stuck in that. We've tossed that into our 80% and it needs to be in the 20, or it's hidden somehow and we need to bring it. I'm a little, I mean, again, it may be my brain, it needs more caffeine, but
yeah.
No,
it's okay. Yeah,
I love it. I almost got it, but not quite.
Yeah. It could show up in a number. This can show up in a number of different ways. To me, it's like, how do you? Well, let me go back to my pad and just see what happens. Because what comes to mind. Why is it paused?
Is it that we toss out the wrong part of the fractal and then we have to go retrieve it from the trash?
Yeah, and it's often, I just want to be super clear, it's often that it was not done by us. So
Yeah.
if here's you, right? Here's your bow and arrow, and you're shooting towards the target. It's like, what is determining who, what, like determines the target, the goal. Because everything we do in strategy means that we got this somewhat right. Somewhat right. And if we're not on this target right, like say trying to think of the easiest way to draw this. Other people have had goals for you, and society has had goals for you. Even if we go, let's just go straight into, I've already sort of, I feel like, trashed Christianity as taught by the church, not necessarily by Christ. So I'm just going to keep going with that one. Might as well just dig myself a little deeper and offend a few more people. But like, if the worldview you were raised in doesn't have an integrated principle of the virgin and the witch, the yin and the yang, right? And you've been taught it's all virgin, right? I love European museums for this, because you're like, wow, it's like all like this virgin birth and all this propriety and all this modesty. And from that, what comes downstream is like a system of medicine where there's a lot of disconnect in the birthing process, right? And there's also a lot of disconnect in the dying process, and there's real consequences of that. There's real consequences. I was a birth doula, so I'm just going to hammer on this. Like, there's real consequences of medicated births. There's the downstream symptomology is horrific, and it goes on. It can go on, honestly, it can go on through the entire lifetime of the mother and the child, right? So that's what happens when the birth is too virgin, because we're not embracing the dark, the bloody, the gore, the pain, and all that. And we're pretending a doctor can birth a baby when really a doctor can't birth a baby. Really, it's a woman who births a child. And the woman births the child from having gotten pregnant by a man, right? And like, when we have an iconology that's become misconstrued for whatever, powerful gain, whatnot, power over people type reasons, this can then change someone's goal. Right? So if you're in a virgin mother type of mindset, how does that impact your goals? Right? So that's just an example of how like society can determine the wrong goal. If you're growing up in like a strict religious tradition, right? Like, that can really mess with like, what is desire? Who am I attracted to? What do I want for my life? Etc. How do I want to have my babies? What's okay? Who should I see as a doctor if I, who do I want to give my power over to? What do I want to take self-responsibility for? All of that can really determine goals. So goals could go to anything from what kind of career do I want? Do I want to run my own business? What kind of community do I want? What kind of family do I want? What kind of relationships do I want? Like, all of that can be in goals. Where do I want to live? What do I want my life to be like, etc. So the reason I'm bringing this part in is that in that 80-20, often what we're doing as we're up leveling is we're being truer to the fractal that's free of culture. So it's like free of all the cultural programming and bullshit that's really gotten in the way of who you are. And this is why I would say in Club Thrive, we're so uniquely seated here, because the primal habits make us primal. It makes us transcend culture. It reminds the human DNA structure of the fractal. And I would say the primal habits do that more so than any other habit. I was listening to Bob, oh gosh, what's his name? I'm gonna have to look in my history. What's his name? Stanet? I posted it in Club Thrive. Stamets. I don't think I'm going to be able to pull out the exact point in this. It's somewhere about 2/3 of the way through, where he talks about the role of psilocybin in community, in reminding community of its essence. It's like returning the community to the fractal. It's really interesting, and why these psychedelics became illegal with power over structures, where instead of encouraging the fractal, the human fractal, we went to like, how do we dumb it down, right? And we do that through sugar and alcohol and processed food primarily. The bread and circuses of the Romans, where we feed people carbs and we give them a lot of access to alcohol. So alcohol, sugar, quick carbs, and that dumbs down people. Whereas like the psychedelics really awaken people to the fractal, and you actually will see in fractals on psychedelics. So they literally remind the brain back into fractal patterns. And he has his own company where he's kind of free of government research, and and yet can publish. So it's kind of cool, some of his research in there. Okay, Mahite, how'd I do?
Excellent, great.
Good.
Maite. So, the H is that you don't pronounce the H. It's just like in Mexico. Maite.
Maite.
Yeah, Maite.
Maite. We're finally getting this after 8 years or something. So.
Oh, more than that. My son was like 1 and he's 14. So. I'm just picking up on the psilocybin again. I saw your post for where to get it in US. So I just want to throw to everyone, if anyone knows a number to get it in Canada, because I'm not sure this number works for Canada.
Okay, yeah, and I'll put that on, I'll put my source on this, in the show notes of this in school.
Okay, because I really want to try it. But
yeah.
I don't know where to look, and I hate Facebook, and I feel like super.
I may have some, I've been doing some investigating. My son says he has a couple of sites, but I have somebody else who got it recommended by her psychotherapist. So I'm waiting for the source in Canada. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So when I get them, I'll connect with you.
Yay. So, and I just want to point to this too, is like what happens with that category, the entheogens, that category of plant medicines. So entheos is in godlike. So entheogen has that in godlike plant. What it does is it surfaces the depth. And this is a big reason why the psychedelics are not addictive, because often like depth isn't fun, right? It's challenging it challenges, engages evolution, right? And that's part of what's so, I think, so powerful, and how that works with the actual silo-biome and all the things that I went over last week. And you can start with very, very, very low dosages, like very homeopathic type dosages, just to activate the microbiome. Okay, so the idea behind your fractal and your goal is just getting, again, the primal habits will help you get your own goals on track, which is why often what I've noticed in leading growth communities is big changes happen in people's lives. Often career path changes happen, job changes happen, often people move, often people change relationship, right, with core people. And that is often normal in a growth path because of the 80-20. What can be, I would think, more isolating is when we don't realize that we're in a growth path, and therefore trying to understand, again, if most people most people go 2 levels above their parents. I think that's what the Integral Institute found 20 years ago. Most people develop about 2 stages beyond their parents, and then they plateau. But people that are more integral or more in a growth path, they continue to develop. But the thing is that percentage of the population gets smaller and smaller. So then it can also seem that your goals are less traditional, right, than the people in your age category, especially as you get older and more people have plateaued. So an example for me, because I never plateaued, but if I go to like the soccer field and hang out with the other soccer moms, they often like plateaued in their job, about whatever, 5-10 years ago. And so they're just comfortable doing the same thing again and again. And they're raising their kids, and it's like, it's all full and it's all now and it's all that. It's just not, they're not actively doing the 80-20. All right, so that said, that's where, when we go into the 4 sets, and I'm just gonna reference back, because I know this will help someone out here get like, where do you go more on this in our world, is if we're in the 4 sets, lessons 5.3. This is mindset, people set, skill set, tool set. If you're intent on your goal and you're doing 80-20, because that's always the nature of the fractal towards the goal, right? That's the fractal towards evolution. That's what we do as a human fractal towards our evolution, is we zoom into 20% and the 80% gets lost in the dust. right? It's no longer needed in order to go to the next level. The same thing happens with the people set. So we want in our people set, we want people who are already where we're trying to go. We want to be with people that are already at that goal. If we're not, then the problem is we're being literally pulled down by the people that are actually in the 80% of our past. And this is like so challenging. But the nature of evolution is challenging. It's adversity. It's like rising up. That's the 20%. Rising up, anti-gravity against adversity. It reminds me, yesterday morning, my daughter wanted help putting her kayak on her car. And I'm like, I said something about like, we're going anti-gravity. And it's her kayak's kind of heavy. To me, it's kind of heavy. And it's like just this like pushing up against gravity. That's what it is like to rise up. I think Jordan Peterson does a phenomenal job on this in his first, his first book was Maps of Meaning, his 12 Rules. In 12 Rules, in all of the references to lobsters, is lobsters literally stand on their tails and fight more or less to the death to see who gets to breed, who gets to pass on their genetic code. Right? Male competition, female selection is how most mammals breed, including humans. Right? So we're used to this. Like, this is what we do. This is part of the fractal of how we choose, is that there is some engagement to a goal and a rising up. Now, if some of you are like, but I'm totally burnt out, right? Empathy map, this is where we can empathize with part of our deeper dream might be to heal, and we might really be in a depth path part of our journey. Also in depth path might be relationships. So those of us who have not yet like bonded in long-term relationships, right? Or those of us who want to have children, right? Like that can bring us on a depth path. Because that's in that sort of like murky, emotional, I love how Alan Watts, he doesn't call the subconscious, he calls our subconscious super conscious, because he's like, it's actually more conscious, it's more directing, it's more in tune with all of the shadow issues than the conscious mind. Like it's the conscious mind that's kind of dumbed down. It's the subconscious, which he's calling super conscious, that's like totally in tune. So if we're more in a relationship path, then in terms of our goal, that our goal is more relational, there's going to be a bit of a depth journey in there, usually around intimacy, around vulnerability, around true connection. Mira.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Kate. Fresh from the master review, this is all starting to make sense. And what you just spoke about now in terms of the example of people wanting to have children and stuff like that, for me, it was really a depth journey. And actually, even after the birth of the kids. And surprisingly, there's been a shift from Friday, in the last few days. Maybe something's happened to me, but everything, the relationship aspects of my life now is suddenly changing for the better. And maybe it's me, because I need to do it anywhere else, but it's me. So I don't know what it is, but all of a sudden it's like the screen's opened and some things are clearer and happier. I'm happier and everybody else is happier. So I can't tell you exactly what it is, but something's there and I'm observing it. So maybe through all these iterations that we're going through.
This is like a little coaching tip for those of you who are coaches. At this point, if like Mira's saying she doesn't know what it is, and I'm gonna say, well, what if you pretended to know? So I'm just gonna challenge her on that. And let's say you had to guess, like what got integrated in you? What got integrated in you? Like how are you like? And we can put this in 80-20 language. Like what's part of the 80% that's fallen away? Like what are you not doing that you were doing before, even if it's super subtle, because relationship stuff can be very subtle. It can also be gross. Like in my house, gross is like, who's emptying the dishwasher? Is this a problem for us? It's up right now in my household. That would be gross, but like subtle would be just like, I relax and smile when, you know, my people come home from work or school. Yeah, go ahead.
Amazing, you actually bring up the correct examples. The dishwasher is in the thing. It's like synchronicity, because I was just sharing with somebody else the other day, things are getting better in terms of organization. The camping was almost like a tipping point for us for changing a whole lot of things. So it made me more organized, because we had to pack our little car with so much of stuff, and then we had to realize we could actually do without most of the things. And then we came back because our helper was away, and I had to basically organize the kitchen. And so I went back to using the dishwasher. We didn't use it for quite some time. So it's like a process got really, how do you say, automated in our home. It makes one little thing made so much of a shift in something. So almost it's like a spark that's been ignited, and it's changed something. I mean, and that may be a silly example, but it's like I can see it. I can see it.
Yeah. Well, often the 80% is a lot of silly examples that are shifting like a greater wave. So, you know, another example of like an 80-20 that can happen relationally, if someone, for example, can't say they're sorry, like can't demonstrate the whole forgiveness pattern, like that will disrupt a relationship from becoming more intimate and evolving. It'll also really affect parenting, and it'll affect not just parenting from parenting your children, but the same thing goes from your parents to you if they're still living, or even if they're not, you can do it through Tarpana. But there's when a pattern is not according to the potential, and that's really what I tried to do in Primal Habits, is say, like, you know, forgiveness, community, like commune, like there's very specific habits that have to do with how we interact with one another that we see in mythology, we see in how humans have passed down stories in different cultures, aka mythology, and we see these same things. These are like core lessons that if people don't learn them, it really affects the target, the goal, the pattern. It starts to intercede on that. The fractal becomes malignant, right? So you can perpetuate a malignant fractal, right? And that's where things, it's like, it's kind of good, but these things still have the same issues. I'm still perpetuating some of the same issues over time. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is, and this is basically, again, sort of catching up to what we were working on in Alta, is we want to name these stages of our past. And so this is where you can see your own evolution in your own development and say, usually by what you were doing then. I want to use this, I want to give an example of this. I think I'll just draw it out. And as I'm talking, you can just draw the same image like this on your screen. So we want to have both of these, our 20% leaps and our 80% releases. I was cleaning the laundry room yesterday. I know some of you are jealous of that activity. Yeah, it like started with a drawer in my bathroom, and I was like, how did this get? And then it just turned into every supplement, all of the things, and then the whole laundry room. And what I discovered in that is it's easy to see, if we look at like the 20% leaps are often the same as the 80% releases. So I could see, there was like a number of things I was going through that were part of my past career. So I could see things that I had that I gathered when I was like an Ayurvedic medicine practitioner. This was an identity that I had. So all the identities are going to be like new floors. And then part of that, I was also like a detox. I was a panchakarma. I'm not going to have a room for everything. Practitioner. Then I had like an herbal medicine company as part of yogahealer. So I had a bunch of like formulas I found yesterday that I've still held on to, these like packets of things. So I had, so again, like in your career, like, so for this to be relevant to you, Nicole, you can go 80-20 on any part of, if you go on just on career, you leave everything else aside for right now and just go on career. And like, what were the skill development jumps to get from one to the next, right? Then I went completely online. Oh, I did certifications. So I ran into a lot of the certificates, right? Then I went to clubs. So each of these, right, I only take 20% of the past and bring it into the future. So then it also means that there's the release going backwards of what is it that I no longer really need? What is it I no longer really need to do? Who is it I no longer need to be? And usually what happens at this is other people will try to pull you back. They'll try to pull you back into your past 80% because that's how they know you. It's not malicious. It's just how humans form bonds. It's like, I know who you were yesterday. So if you stop being that tomorrow, then I don't know who I am, because who I am, who we are, is in relationship to each other. It's very hard to define who you are without defining that in relationship to other people. So if you run a company like I do, it's in relationship to my clients and my team. If you are part of a family, it's in relationship to the roles you have in that family. So even if you're a writer, it's in relationship to the reader. So when we get that, when we change, it redefines our relationships, right? That's one of the ways to see. And again, this kind of goes back into school, the lesson number, it's in Future You, 2.3, what is identity evolution? And there's a lot of the same images in that lesson as well, is you're defining in many ways who you were, and that helps you find who you don't need to be anymore. And it doesn't mean that you don't get to keep that part of it. So like Laura, this is what I was trying to help you with in terms of your offer, is like, she can't choose to be all those things to all the people. Like, what's the one part that she wants to be in the future? Okay, so what you want to do right now is go through your past identities and what were both the releases and the leaps in terms of who you were and who you became next. And the reason this is so helpful is that in this, you can start to see the fractal of you. So there's some part of me that's in some part of you that's stayed the same throughout. And that's the fractal. That's pushing, if you will, that's like, oops, I'm gonna choose green for this, for life. That's like pushing the arrow forward into the future. So in my example, like if I'm choosing, again, we get to choose the goal. When we choose the goal, that means that anything that's not the goal, and most people fuck this up, so listen, most people don't realize that everything else becomes the sacrifice. And that this is part of the last 80%. Right, and then this becomes the 20%. This becomes the focus to the goal.
I had a question just about doing this, if I may.
Yeah.
The 20% is the next thing, like for you, the 20% would be like a shift to online, and then the next 20% would be the clubs? Or is it more like by doing the clubs, you are keeping some 20% thing that isn't on the chart or isn't named yet, and then you're
Like
letting
all
go
of this,
80%.
it all like rolls up into
So all
that.
of those are 20% for the purpose of the exercise and what you
Some
are
part of it,
not becoming.
like some part of that is true to the whole fractal. So some
Yeah, I
part of
get
all
it.
the stages of the past are part of the fractal. And then by knowing your own fractal, like by really studying yourself, this is Ben Hardy's whole point in Rapid Transformation, and 10x is easier than 2x, well, which is really Dan Sullivan's point, but that's another point, is that when you're looking back repetitively, you're studying the self. So in yoga, this is svadhyaya, self-study. So I'll use a concrete example. When I was trying to decide the target of like, should I go all in on writing on Inflamed and Primal Habits, right? Which seemed in many ways like a huge distraction from just growing my business towards clubs, because it took a ton of work. A ton. I mean, Carolyn, as a book editor, like silly amount of work. But if I go back, was it true to the fractal? And if I look at how my intellect has worked over time, I was always interested in like very big picture. If I just do this now, the same line for my intellect, I was interested in big picture thinking. I was interested in ancient culture. I was interested in alternative healing systems that arose out of ancient culture. I was then interested in like modern tech for community, right? And so it's like, then when it came time up here to like, should I research on primal, like what were the habits that caused humans to evolve? It perfectly lines up with the fractal. So then it's like, of course. So no matter how weird it gets, because it got pretty weird, right? With urine therapy, with psilocybin therapy, with cow dung therapy, like that's exactly where all that research landed. Super controversial, not popular, right? But is it true to the fractal? If it's true to the fractal, then it just, it proves it follows the proof of like, yeah, keep going, and you're a futurist, and it's going to be uncomfortable for a while till culture catches up. So my point in all that being, you guys, is you're always going to run up against culture in these 80-20s. And it might be your family culture. It might be your friend group culture. Like if I had followed my friend group culture, I wouldn't be a multimillionaire, right? I'd be like them and just like kind of like fighting to pay the mortgage and pay the school stuff for their kids and make sure their kids get into a good college, right? I'd be in that. Like so at some point you get with these 80-20s that you're true to the fractal, which means you're counterculture. Because counterculture is not doing the 80-20. This was Dan Sullivan's point with naming 10x is easier than 2x. That came from Dan, not Ben. Is that like 2x is culture. Everyone else is doing 2x. Small, steady improvements, trying to fight against inflation to maintain standard of living. That's 2x. 10x is what we do in Club Hero, and we get ready to do in Club Thrive, which is like, yep, there's going to be a huge amount of sacrifice. A lot of that's going to be cultural. But boy, the target over time, this does lead to your true you, which is beyond your wildest dreams. Like it leads to exceptional, right? And that's why it's worth it. And that's why the people set has to evolve with you. Otherwise, the 80% will continue to pull you back, whether that's at work, whether that's in your core relationship, whether that's in your core friendships, or whether it's just honestly part of like your algorithms on social media apps. So you're either like pushing you forward because you're watching people that are already where you want to be next, or it's pulling you back. Maite, is your hand up?
Yeah, I have two questions that keep popping around those same issue each time you talk about it. So, because I don't see, whenever I try to identify the 80%, I just don't see much of my life that I can, like, for example, my job is not part of my goal, but I won't sacrifice it. I mean, it's paying the rent. So it's just, I cannot give up my job. I cannot give up my sons. They're, it's just, I don't see, I just don't see 80%. That's a whole lot. And the other side of the same question, I think, is how do you evolve your people set without, like, because, Club Thrive is a pretty evolved community. It exists only online.
Yeah.
In my immediate environment of middle Quebec City, which is a very conservative, small-minded city, it is, but I have friends, and they're real flesh friends.
Yeah.
It feels good to see real people.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I just don't see. I hear you. I see it can be through. I just don't see how I can apply it.
Yeah. Okay. So part of it is, can you see your fractal?
Kind of. I can see like the leaps that I've made in my life.
Let me try to write legibly. Can you see your fractal? And this is, I'm not saying you have to change everything, or drop 80% of everything like immediately, but the way that it was helpful for me, I feel like when I was doing this with Ben last year, one of the things that really stood out is it's like, even if it's just to achieve the next goal, so you don't have to think of things as forever. You can think of it really in this next season. From this time of this recording, the next season is between now and the new year. It's like, what should have the majority of your attention? And another way of saying that is, what is the new floor and the new filter just for this next phase? And what are the next tests that you need to run? So like my challenge for you, Laura, last week was like one product, one service, one offer, right? And that's the 80-20. And yes, you can do 100% of things, but when you just say, I'm going to roll up the best 80% where it's meeting the market right now into one product, one package, one service, and then try to go sell that, does that simplify everything? And can you make more money doing that? Like, does it meet a number of different things? What doesn't mean that she can't continue to do that 80% of things. It just means not now. So what is showing up in the not now? For example, I would love to put all my time into getting Upcycle Your Pee onto Amazon, and I have zero bandwidth right now to do that. So even though I want to do that, given what my real next 20% is, like that gets kicked into the 80. Right, just because it's not the priority. If my priority right now is developing these clubs, will that book have an impact on this? Probably not. Not really. Not any more so than having Primal Habits out. It can also, you can look at the time that you're spending with friends and family that might feel like it can, that you can just do that part more potently and have it take less time. So for example, like I meet my mom at indie soccer games and spend quality time with my mom at indie soccer games because I need to be at indie soccer games whether my mom's there or not. Right? And then I also need once a week to feed my family a really good meal. That's part of my value set. It's not a lot, but like once or twice a week, good meal. I can also invite my parents over for that meal because they live a mile away, and then I can feed everybody at the same time. and maximize my time. And I know a lot of these things are intuitive, but it's just a way of compacting around the whole picture of the multidimensional life goals. If we look at your career though, and you just do this just in a line with your career fractal, it might integrate in other ways. So you can look at this in terms of skills, tools, right? And just see the fractal within that, within your JOB.
What is JOB? Oh, job. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
French issue.
I spell it out like people spell out dirty 4-letter words. No, it's I don't mean it that way. So when you look back, it's like, what were some of the skills that got to the later skills, that got to the later skills, that got to the like, and I would also do this in terms of what do you have the most competence in? So skills, tools, competence. And then also like what brings you some joy. So for example, I really do like writing. Like I really process something. There's something else that happens from that. I was thinking yesterday of, this like kind of like crazy story. I can't really tell Indy, but I want to record it so that she has it later. And it's like so true to this next book I'm writing on the 7 to 8 figure biohacker journal. But I'm not really writing, but I would like to like carve out at least 30 minutes a week where I just like update it with the current crazy things that I just want to capture, because it's just bizarre and unique, the things that I'm experiencing and the conversations that I'm having. And if I don't capture them, they're just gone. My friend who runs Writers on Fire, she calls it like capturing the butterflies. And I'm so glad she made me do that, because that became Witch's Cancer Journal. And that was really it was first of all helpful for me in my healing process. But then since then I've heard it's been really helpful for a lot of other people. So the joy line on this, it was like, oh, how long have I really liked writing for? Like, when did I discover that I process things through writing? And then when was my first idea to write a book? Probably when I was like 33. When did I first publish a book? I think when I was, 2015. So like when I was 40, early 40s. So it took me a long time to do it, but it's a recurring theme that I can just see for me, like, okay, books is something that just like, if I can just admit to myself it's part of the fractal, then I can like make peace with it a bit. So what is it for you? The skills, the tools, the competence? Because then you might see that it goes somewhere.
Well, writing, for me, writing has been there across the board. It has been my, like the thing. I've applied it from journalist, from grad student, postdoc, college student, I mean, everything.
Okay, so there you go.
Deep intellectual work, like I'm crazy. I just love it. I just love complex stuff. Give me the most complex philosophy book. I'm a happy girl.
There you go. So then that's showing like the joy part and the skill part. And then you're like, well, what tools am I using? And then with 80-20, there's also always new tools. And there's old tools that are consistent, right? But then there's like new tools with how it's showing up next. Because the part, this part of this evolutionary spiral is like, and this is where people get really upset when they when they, think of, like, some people get really upset when they think about human robots and self-driving cars, right? There's some level, I would say, of, in some people, there's excitement. In a lot of people, there's like denial of what's coming, right? And job displacement and all that, that's really part of the next wave of the AI economy and all that. And it's like certain people are going to be like completely surprised when they lose their job. Other people will predict this is where the next skills tools are going, right? So if like anyone's creating an online course right now, like part of the problem with that is like everything's free on YouTube already, right? So like, how are you going to sell it? How are you going to compete for attention? Like what's the chance that you can make a better one than with the stuff that's already on YouTube, right? So if it's not original, then, and even if it is original, how is it going to be seen, heard, found, et cetera, in a really noisy place? So part of this is like when we see that the market, this is what the market does, is it continues to evolve, which is why if you visit a communist country, you generally see, you're like looking into the past. I remember this when I first was living in China, and it was like, oh, okay, they've mastered building large monolithic buildings out of concrete, right? Where like everything looks exactly the same. They've lost all innovation. They've lost connection to style. Like they, more or less like missed all of the stylish inventions of the last 100 years, right? And so if a market economy keeps developing towards innovation, because humans are naturally innovative when we have a free market, then where is it going next? And where is that actually in part determining our 80-20, et cetera? So another example of this is like how you choose to use money. There's so many different options right now. How you choose to use investment, how you choose to use time, attention. There's so many different choices right now. So according to the fractal that is you, where is it going? And what needs to be in the 80% sacrifice? Like where do your blinders really need to be in order to hit that target? And then how does that then change what shows up on your calendar? Because how it shows up in our calendar is how we show up in time.
So what shows up in our calendar and what drives our investment is anything that is true to the fractal, and everything else drops. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is really how I think of it. And it's like, how does our fractal intersect what's happening now in the market, right? Like who we are is not, I like how Alan Watts, I'm quoting a lot of Alan Watts, I listened to a lot of his old stuff. He talks about how if who you are is also the ecosystem, like you can't be separated from your ecosystem. This is the whole philosophy behind microbiome, but we didn't have that word. He didn't have that word then. It was like after Alan Watts. The vocabulary of like who you are is actually the ecosystem. So if we look at the market as part of the ecosystem and the new tools that are arising that humans are developing as also part of the changing ecology, right? That like who we are is always part of the changing ecology. It's always moving. So if we pretend that like if you're a truck driver and you're going to be surprised in 10 years that like self-driving trucks are overtaking the marketplace, well, there were a lot of predictors of that were happening if we were like somewhat paying attention to right now to what's coming next. So part of what we want to be engaged in is like what is also happening in the broader landscape and how does our fractal intersect, right? Like what's going on? How are we riding that wave into the future so that we're not, essentially like left behind? Yeah, Carolyn.
So this isn't fully thought through, but I'm trying to voice something that's been going on for me for a while, and this is maybe helping. There's a fractal of me, kind of the the intellectual college student, the editor, kind of refined that scholarly, as one of my sort of life coaches has said, is sort of the lab technician person who's sort of behind the scenes, head down, kind of working on stuff. But what I'm finding in the last couple of years is that there's this it feels like a different identity that's probably more true is emerging. And he actually calls it by adventurous. And I thank him for those two words because they help me kind of sort 2080, I guess. It feels like a very different me, and it's really not even fully born yet. Interestingly, at a point, and just an aside, I had a session with a guy, an astrologer who does Vedic astrology, and he said, "Oh yeah, you've done this 25 years of Mars and Rahu. I forget what they call it. These sort of big scale periods in your life." And those are all like work and kind of like working through and kind of sloggy stuff. And I'm just starting toward merging into a Jupiter period, which is sort of like when you're, kind of radiant and things, it's not like it's all ducky, but things come to you more easily. And that aligns to me with that kind of adventurous idea and also kind of what I'm feeling inside. So when I put the fractal, do the fractal thing, I can see the fractal, refining of that more lab intellectual kind of person. So like, where's this other thing coming from? But when I put down, sort of struck me like what seems to be going through is there's this sort of digging down to truth or reaching out to truth. And then when I get there, I kind of go, well, sort of digging down to a truth of me that maybe got buried or gone.
Yeah.
It's just kind of where I land. So I'm a digger outer of truth. It's kind of my fractal. I do that with manuscripts too, I guess, really. So I'm a digger outer of truth. What that truth is like a second, that's not part of this question right now.
Well, yeah, but you could probably see it. You could probably do the same thing of like, what is truth? Like, what is your pattern through truth? Just kind of like I did in this section here.
Okay. As you say that, I kind of go, yeah, I think I kind of sense that.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay. And then it's kind of part of the reason why I'm here with you.
Yeah, like just to speak to like the disowned parts of the self that then later surface as you go through stages or Rahu and blah 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 in psychology, in whether we call it psychology or astrology, is there's parts of the self that haven't had a chance to express the fractal, right? And usually a lot of that is tied to culture. It's usually family culture to begin with, but it can also be like my family culture. Like a lot of my trauma was from medical culture. It had nothing to do with my family. It was just how my family culture was intersecting in medical culture that affected a lot of my, hard set PTSD pattern. Right? So when we look at repairing the fractal, if you will, that's like the work that we do in releasing trauma.
Yeah.
So we release some trauma and then we discover more of who we are and where that is intersecting in the present going into the future. And that's part of healing the past. It's also part of when we're healing, like when we're doing ancestral healing work, like in Tarpana and in other ancestral healing type practices, like we're actually healing the fractal backwards, that Imesha, Unmesha. And so I would say as much as everyone, I do prescribe that like everyone has trauma. There's definitely huge varying degrees of like how much. And I would say everyone here is self-aware enough to know, whether it's like super subtle, somewhat concealed, or whether it's like super obvious and has really impacted our lives. If we go back to, I think a question that might be useful is like, who would I be if this trauma were fully healed? Then that will reveal the fractal even more. And the question is like, who would I be without this? And, we can see great leaders. Like I think, when Tony Robbins talks about, his past and his childhood and a lot of the neglect and some abuse that he suffered. It's, at some point you transcend it, right? You choose to, if you're on the growth path, you're choosing that that's part of the 80% that you're transcending, is you're transcending the pattern. You're transcending like the limitation or which was in obscurity and controlling your goals, your actions, your 80-20, the sacrifice to the target. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, who am I without that? Who would I be without that?
Mm-hmm.
And then to some degree with identity evolution, we're like, who would I be without that old story about myself? Right? So say I perpetuate a story of like I had this story for a long time that I wasn't a good people manager. And then actually it just turned out I wasn't that good at hiring the right people. It had much less to do with people management and just I had the wrong people around me because I'd hired the wrong people. Right? So just in changing that story of like, I'm not a good manager to like, I'm an amazing manager if I have the right people around me. Right? That changes everything. And how did I know that? By, well, basically firing people and getting better people around me that could actually do what we needed to do as a small company. And so sometimes there's just these stories. I'll use another trauma example in this one that can like really determine sort of how we see these. Like my sister had a pattern of telling me I was a bad sister from like the time I was 12. So pretty early on, that like I had a story around that was perpetuated by her, but actually it didn't account for that she has just a very different growth path than I do, right? So I just wasn't very relatable, right? So again, it's like, who am I without that story? Well, maybe that affects how then I can bond with other women, my other sisters, right? And have very close relationships with my other sisterhood that might not be blood sisterhood. So Juliet's saying it feels like it can be a lonely path letting go of the 80%. Well, not really, because the 80% is pathological at some point to the fractal. Because the fractal is always zooming in. If left to its own devices, that's the whole point of like, you are nature, you are the evolutionary spiral. Without impedance, this is naturally what it does. So what that means is you're going to have so much more intimacy and connectivity if you stay true to the 20%. And if you don't, you'll probably do other things to try to connect with people, like drink more, smoke more, eat more, buy more, do more things that just are part of culture's pathology that just keep you from actually needing to climb the ladder. And this is where it's really a good idea to just to look at like how you spend money, how you spend time, and whatnot that's not actually true to the fractal or not true to the next floor. Because what you might find in there is like, oh, that stuff just kind of like, I don't really know where that time goes, or I don't really know where that money goes. So I don't really think of it as less lonely at all. I think of it actually as there's so much more intimacy. There's so much more connectivity at that next floor. There's so much less, and I'm using pathology very loosely here. I'll admit that, but there's less of that pathology or stuff that's like not really true to the evolution of your fractal. It's kind of like TV. It's like if your time is, if like you're watching something and you're just like, I'm not learning, I'm not growing, this is just part of like some old pattern, that's like an easy way to see where time awareness goes. If you're trying to connect with friends and it's not like super amazing, right? It's not fun, it's not edgy, it's not evolving, then is it lonely to let that go? Maybe temporarily, but maybe you just optimize that time with those people so it's like less time, more connected. And then you also find people who are truly at your next new floor, right? Because there you're going to have, it's like all circuits are lighting up. Not just like 20% of your circuits are lighting up. It's like at least 80% of your circuits are lighting up and you're able to connect and grow and have deep meaning more quickly. It's also why bonding happens much more quickly at these higher levels, right? Where like you meet someone, you're like, I've only known you for 10 minutes and I feel like I've known you your whole life, Like those types of experiences start to happen, I would say more. And often people find when they first join Club Thrive that they're just like, oh wow, like this is a vulnerable, intimate community where I can show up, I can have my stuff going on with no shame, and see where there's real connection towards growth. It's only, I would say, lonely if we're not putting ourselves in places where we're getting established with people where like where we're at our new floor. So if we're trying to go it alone, that doesn't really work. So for example, for me locally, in the last 20 years, I've had to like leave my community to find growth groups, but now my community's caught up. So there's a lot of local things happening around entrepreneurship and mentoring and that just weren't available to me then, that now I can like go seek those groups. And then when I do, I meet amazing people because the filter is so strong to be in that group, right? Of like local, of entrepreneurs in my little ecosystem. So when I do meet up, it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like I had no idea, but it's just because you chose the group with the right filters. So that can happen with work. That can also happen with your clients. Those of you who have clients, that it can happen in selecting, next people set. Okay, so I put a bunch of questions in the chat, which is like, what is the 20% that got you here? So one of the things that I love how Ben Hardy emphasizes in his writing and teaching is that like you've already done this. Like you've already done this 80-20. Like this is just naturally what's happening, but the more we tune into it, the more consciously we can attune to the fractal. And then seeing these phases of what you've left behind. So if I look at that, there was a lot initially with like conformity, like trying to, like it really bothered me that my friends took jobs because of insurance. Like that was like, always seemed totally nuts to me, that they would sacrifice how they spent their time. And what's interesting about that is like last week, I think we published the Crowd Health interview, which is me with this guy who started this alternative to healthcare. So I can see that, again, it's like when you look at what you've left behind in this 80% releases, that'll also help you see where it's going, where you're going. So my suggestion is that we, it's like with your accountability partner in Club Thrive, that you workshop through these questions and really talk them through, because it's in the talking them out that we get the most insight. So I want to also point to that these other questions around like, what are the critical issues that arise as you step into the 20%? And what are the critical issues that arise as you release the 80%? That's part of how, in terms of what we do in Club Thrive, that all shows up under strategy with critical issues and strategy. So I'm just going to share like the longer answer to your question for both Juliet and Maite is critical issues and strategies. So critical issues are always part of the goal. Like you never have a goal without having critical issues arise. So using critical issues to create strategy is pushing them through a thinking process. And in that thinking process, right, you start to see the way towards the goal. Like it actually develops the strategy, which then develops the action, make the plan. So I think what I've done today is just really given us an overview of like fractal and 80-20 and how to start to plug in that into strategy with the goals. But the best way to use these questions is more in like workshop format. where you just go through them and you answer them together. And in that it's funny, how talking it through happens. Writing them out is also super effective. So like write them out first and then workshop them together with a partner, and you'll have another level of insight. In terms of the actual concepts that I wanted to teach today, does everyone feel a little bit more comfortable with like what we mean by 80-20? Yes, okay. Does everyone feel more comfortable with looking at 20% leaps and naming them? Okay. 80% releases and naming them? Okay, and then the fractal, like you as a fractal, is that like, okay, good. Because what I wanted to do today in a lot of ways is just establish language. Because when we have shared language, it's much easier to workshop around these questions with each other. And then what we can do is problem solve with these. And that's a lot of what we've been doing in Club Hero, is like, how do we actually problem solve, given that this is more or less like an articulation skill set, right? Where we can use these as a way of pushing a goal through a thinking pattern, right? Pushing it through a thinking structure. Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm happy to, we have a few more minutes. Yeah, I'm happy to stay on, answer any other questions. Teresa.
Can you repeat again what you just said about the shared language? I've always loved that concept, but then you said shared language is, or creating the shared language becomes do you remember what you said? It felt brilliant, and then I didn't get through the sentence.
I know, and I'm like, what did I say?
I know. Did anybody else catch it?
It's how a community evolves. So just for one, like if we don't have language to communicate it, it doesn't actually exist. And this is where, first there was the Word, and the Word was God, right? And we find that that's not just true to Christianity. Like that's a Vak is how it's written about in the Vedic texts, right? We have this power of the word, the power of articulation. And when we can name something, like when we can name, like Pareto's principle, that's the 80-20 rule. Pareto's principle was really easy to see once he saw it. The chakras are easy to experience if someone points them out. So are the koshas, right? Or the levels of subtle anatomy. Right, so all of that is like, Ken Wilber, he wrote a lot about it in terms of, like the map is not the territory, but if you don't have a map, it's really hard to explore the territory. Right, so we just don't want to get lost in the map. We want to use the map. In 80-20 right now, in these leaps, that's a map of your fractal. And so the 20% leaps, the 80% releases, is a way of understanding that you've naturally put, especially in times of like the greatest clarity, the greatest joy, the greatest connectivity. Like if you look at your path in terms of that and those peak experiences, and you look for the threads in that, it's going to be easier than looking at, if you look at like the hard times or the regressions, that'll usually be part of the 80% releases. Right, like I stopped wallowing in that, right? Or I stopped doing that, or I stopped taking jobs with that kind of boss, or I stopped choosing team members that were, as my headhunter points out, that are virtual assistants. It's like, all right, yeah, I stopped not leading people to processes or whatnot. Like there's things in there that you'll see as part of stuff that didn't work is usually part of that 80%. Okay, so if we have articulation, if we have the power of the word, if we have the power of Vak, if we have shared principles that we name things, then we can just say like, well, in order to achieve that goal, like what's the 80% of stuff that's not efficient to that goal? What's like 80% of the time that you're spending that's not efficient to the goal? Because Pareto's principle is a principle, it's a rule that occurs in nature, it's a law of nature, right? We can just assume that it is a really good way for us to operate in order to go towards growth. It's not a tactic, it's a rule. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Teresa, that it's like our shared language and doing this little language update that it's been happening in Club Hero all year. I just want to update Club Thrive to like, this is part of our shared language. We're using it at our live events. We're using it in a lot of workshopping. We're finding it super effective. And the book that will come out on this is on, I mean, it's in Master Review, but Ben Hardy will release Rapid Transformation in May of 2025. And this is like a lot of, you know, where he has all like the research, blah, blah, blah. I really am enjoying the 80-20 sales and marketing book, which is not, I'm not recommending that as a book, but that's where I first found a teacher, Perry Marshall, teaching that 80-20 as a fractal, and how it just, you can always take of, if you ask yourself right now, like, what is the 20% of things that you're doing that are driving 80% of your success? However you're defining that success or that goal, right? What are the 20% of things that you're doing that are driving that? Then you automatically find the 80% that's less effective. Where it goes fractal is you do the same thing with the 20% that's working. You say, what's the 20% of the 20%? So that's what I was trying to do with Laura in terms of her offer. And I think for you, Nicole, it'll also help you in terms of like your offer if you decide to go entrepreneur then rather than back to work. And even if you did decide to go back to work, it would still be like, what's the 20% from everything that I've done? So I'm not just pick and choosing parts of it, but I'm refining the fractal that's integrating, and this is strategic intuition, both this over here and that over there, so that it's truly innovative to the fractal. And then like, what's the, you can just ask yourself like, what's truly the 20% that would make the biggest difference in, again, product or service in whoever it affects, right? And that's how you start to refine that 20%. Yeah.
Would it be true, at least what I'm starting to see and starting to realize, is that what should have been my 20% way back before any of this really existed in my brain kept popping up every time there was a change, and I kept veering away from it because the belief was that's not where I'm going to be able to support my family.
Yeah. That's culture, right?
Yeah, so culture kept pulling me, and so
Right. And if you look at that, it's because of being risk averse,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So then you're saying, okay, risk aversion is then part of that 80%.
yeah,
So what we find is that, yes, like this whole, like growth paths are not that risk averse. It's not, this is not that safe way is 2x, right? 2x is always going to be safe. Culture is always going to reinforce 2x behaviors. I'm seeing it right now with my kid where she's like, why do I have to learn this? And I'm like, I don't know. I wouldn't learn it. I would do this instead, right? But then she can't get the A. And she wants the A. I don't really care. She wants the A, right? And so then she's in the system of culture. But if we know we're in the system of culture, okay, then we're just going to minimize. Like, what are the 20% of actions that are going to drive 80% of the results so that I'm not putting in extra time into those things? So we can, yeah, I would play it. I would look for the deep patterns like that and say, what is part of that was part of the pathology that got perpetuated that I'm now ready to release? And then what are the 20% of actions that'll release 80% of the pathology?
yeah. Because when we did our leaps,
Yeah.
in Alta, and even when I wrote them down, that they're still at every change of job, that was at the change of job was the opportunity to change the path, and I never chose to change the path.
Right.
And
Yeah.
every time it came, and I'm starting to see, and of course, because that's my mindset, and it even was then before I lost the job, but it was my mindset that I knew there was a change in that coming. So that was the part of the fractal that I was looking at. Now I'm trying to expand that a little bit, and I'm seeing other patterns emerge. So there's always way more to see than what meets the eye.
That's right. Exactly. And then as you're getting more clear on that, right, you're just adding it to the map.
Yeah.
So when we find big patterns like that, it's like, how do you add it to the map so that it's captured So that then it can be part of, again, it's either going to be part of the sacrifice or part of the target. It's going to go into one or the other. Yeah. And if anyone's having problem with like the fractal part of the how to get the 20% of the 20%, I can do it with like feeding my family. Like I've really launched on that like 1 meal a week, because I was doing more than that intentionally, right? But if I like just put all my intention into like one family meal a week, that's lovely. Like it solves a lot of other problems, right? And then it can shift responsibilities in other places, et cetera, but it can also just take the emphasis off like, I don't care, right? Like everyone will eat and be fed and be happy, but like I don't have to put like mindful energy into like family cook if that's not part of my 20% in this next phase. I can start to minimize that, but we can have like one amazing meal together, and I can like capture a lot of the benefit and the bounty of that. If we look, this is the last thing I'll say, and then I have a conflict. When I was creating the Club Thrive course of like, what are the core competencies, you can imagine I had to choose from all of bodythrive, all of living Ayurveda, all of master review, all of what we had learned in yoga health coaching, and try to condense that into the most condensed curriculum that would help people heal, and to get on with their strategic life goals, like really move their life goals forward, right? And so that's an example of just 80-20. I did the same thing with Yoga Health Coaching and Wellness Pro Academy. It's like, how do we condense to find the 20% that drove 80% of the results, and then build that as the new floor? All right, we'll keep working on it. This was just an update. Yay, yeah, namaste to you all too. So glad you're here. Mwah.